Good afternoon. Welcome to the first China panel of the IPPE conference. Today, we have 4 papers in the first panel of China. My name is Samki Chang. I'm the chair for this panel. The title of the panel is Industrial Policies, Theory and Practice. 4 papers are going to be presented in the panel. The first one is called Local Upgrading Coalitions, the Case of the Semiconductors Industry in China. It's going to be presented by Alex. The second paper is investigating the linkages between industrial policies and M&A dynamics in China. It's going to be presented by Chiara. The third paper is China's escape from the peripheral condition, a success story, by Francesco Macheda. The last paper is going to be presented by Vitor. His title is The New Projectment Economy as a Higher Stage of Intervention in the Territory. Okay, before we start, may I just remind everyone that please put yourself on mute when you're not speaking, and you will have the chance to ask questions at the end of the session. Every presenter have 15 minutes to present. Okay, I will hand it over to Alex now. Over to you, Alex. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you for reminding me. Sometimes I forget. Okay, can you see it?
Yes, no problem. It's fine. Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool. So thank you, Sanki. Thank you for the introduction. So good afternoon, everyone. So today I'm presenting part of an ongoing research project about the role of state-business relations in the process of economic development in China. And due to time constraints, I cannot cover everything I intended originally, so I'm sorry for that, but I'm happy to take questions afterwards. Okay? So here, just a brief outline for the presentation today. So first, I will make a brief introduction on the theory behind state-business relations or state-business coalitions. Then I move to more recent developments in China, and I try to stress the importance of the local state. Then the third part is an actual comparison between these 3 cities, Shenzhen, Suzhou, and Dongguan, during the so-called indigenous innovation period, so more or less after 2006. And the fourth part is an illustration from the semiconductors industry in these 3 cities. Introduction. There is a long tradition in studying the role of state-business relations for economic development. For example, if you take the developmental state literature, and in particular the concept of embedded autonomy by Peter Evans, they highlighted the necessity of state bureaucrats to be embedded into industrial capital, so to build, in Evans' words, common projects of capital accumulation. And this is important because of the industry-specific information that business have, but bureaucrats lack. And this, of course, stands in sharp contrast with the neoclassical tradition of focusing on rent-seeking and corruption problems that emerge precisely out of these state-business relations or interactions. Chinese studies, there is a well-established literature on state-business relations, especially at the local level, focusing on the informal ties between local bureaucrats and businesses. So if you think about the ideas of the local developmental or the local entrepreneurial state, they highlighted these predominantly positive roles of those ties, normally informal ties between bureaucrats and business. Moving forward, I'd like to highlight 2 recent developments taking place in China, in China's political economy. The first one is the emergence of a certain innovation-driven or indigenous innovation paradigm by the mid-2000s, more or less. So some important programs, as you know, the medium and long-term program for science and development from 2006, the strategic emerging industries from 2010, made in China, the Chinese standards launched last year, 2020. These are some of the most important. But what I'd like to highlight is that in order to design and implement those policies, state bureaucrats need more specific and technical information about these specific industries. So those old informal ties highlighted by the previous literature that I talked about may need to be revamped. That brings us to the second trend that I'd like to highlight here, that is a trend towards, let's say, consultative mechanisms and then perhaps an institutionalization of state and business relations in contemporary China, with the increasing importance of institutions such as the People's Political Consultative Conferences, the People's Congresses, business associations, the ACFAC, so the All China Federation of Industry and Commerce. And there is a growing literature in the past, let's say, 10 years, emphasizing their role in the articulation, even if in a limited manner, of policy inputs by businesses and the buildup of relative stable reciprocal relations between bureaucrats on the one hand and business on the other. So it's just to highlight the continuing importance of the local state for China's political economy. So if you take see the blue and the gray line, they represent the central government share of fiscal expenditures and the central share of investments in fixed assets. As you can see, they are all decreasing starting in the 2000s. And this trend not reversed. On the yellow and the orange line are, of course, the parallel trend. So the share of subnational governments on both fiscal expenditures and fixed asset investments. So you can see that up to nowadays, local governments or subnational governments are still very, very important in terms of economic decisions, investments, and expenditures. Now we move to the actual comparison between Shenzhen, Suzhou, and Dongguan in the course of the indigenous innovation period. And we chose these three cities because they all registered quite impressive growth performance after 1978, and they are all leading clusters for electronics or ICT production in China. And here we're going to be looking at three different variables at each city. The first one is the different types of foreign capital. So we're not concerned with the levels of FDI. If a city has more or less of FDI, that's not important for us. It's more the type of FDI, because that determines the technological gap between multinational corporations and local firms, leading to different learning opportunities and upgraded spaces for the local firms. So here we're pretty much following the work by Ling Chen. The second variable is about skills, so absorptive capacity, because that determines the ability of the cities or local firms to identify, assimilate, and exploit knowledge from transnational corporations or from more advanced technologies. And the third variable is more related to the bureaucracy of each city. So you're looking at intra-state ties. You're trying to see if local bureaucracies are more cohesive, like in the canonical developmental state model, or more fragmented. I'll give some illustrations later. And then as part in the part of the outcomes, you're going to be looking for two different variables, GDP growth and innovation. Here we can start with the first variable, so the different types of foreign capital. So basically we're extending the work by Ling Chen, and our concern here, as I said, is not with the levels of FDI, but actually we argue that larger average FDI projects, like the ones you see in Dongguan and Suzhou, so the green and the orange lines, they diminish the learning opportunities or upgraded space for domestic firms. Because in case of larger multinationals, sometimes called as the dragon heads, as the case in Suzhou, for instance, they normally bring their own suppliers, crowding out the space for local firms to upgrade. If you look at Shenzhen, the blue line, here the average size of each FDI project is smaller, allowing more upgrading space. So because the technological gap, therefore, between multinationals in the case of Shenzhen in relation to local firms is much smaller. But that's the two different types of capital you're talking about. So larger firms versus smaller ones. Then we move to the absorptive capacities. So we start with some data on the university system. Because local firms or local economies must possess enough absorptive capacities to get knowledge from advanced technologies, right? So here we are looking at universities, and we have gathered a list of all universities in these three cities and classified them by different ranking or classification systems. And the idea here is not to delve into each ranking. We know that each ranking has its own problems, but the idea is to get the more qualitative conclusions for them, especially because they parallel with each other. So Dongguan has only 3 universities, and while Shenzhen and Suzhou have 5 and 8 respectively. And normally these universities in Shenzhen are better ranked than the ones in Suzhou. So even if you consider the official classification of the first tier, or the Ministry of Education. So Shenzhen tends to be better ranked than Suzhou, for instance. And if you take the data from the Times Higher Education or the Shanghai ranking, again, you can see that normally Shenzhen has better universities on this criteria in relation to Suzhou, and of course, better than Dongguan as well. So Shenzhen seems to be performing better than Suzhou, and later also better than Dongguan. And then we move to the R&D personnel as a share of the total employment. So as you can see, all the three cities present increasing figures, somehow in line with the overall paradigm of innovation-driven period. But Shenzhen outperforms the other two, while Dongguan is a laggard in this comparison. So here you can see the same pattern emerging again. Shenzhen first in blue, then Suzhou, and then Dongguan. It just to believe that Shenzhen has higher absorptive capacities than the other cities. And then you see the third variable, which is intra-state ties. So here we're trying to understand whether a city's bureaucracy is more cohesive or more fragmented in a continuum line. So based on the administrative structure of each city and on the secondary literature as well. So we can start with Dongguan, which is a famous case because it has a very fragmented structure. And we find on our research and also on secondary literature that it often undermines policy cohesion and policy implementation in the city, especially because the townships can be quite powerful and subvert the ideas coming from the prefecture. Now, Suzhou in second place, it doesn't have such a fragmented structure, but it has 4 quite powerful county level cities. And perhaps the most famous one here is Kunshan, where you find many industrial parks and development zones, and where many of those dragon heads firms are located. And again, the literature also indicates some problems in terms of policy cohesion and policy implementation in Suzhou. Now, Shenzhen finally has a linear administrative structure with no county-level cities, and also it has the advantage of having this sub-provincial status, which in practice allows it to bypass the province level in many instances, for instance, in terms of fiscal arrangements. And this guarantees more bureaucratic cohesion in the city, therefore more cohesion in terms of policy implementation as well. Now we move to the outcomes of these three cities. So we start here on the left side, this graphic about the performance in terms of growth rates. So you can see quite clearly that Shenzhen performs in first place, then we have Suzhou, the second highest growth rate, and then Dongguan, the third place. The right-hand side, you can see the data for patents. And here using authorized inventions as a number of patents instead of the total applications for patents. So of course, our numbers are much lower. And there are many methodological issues involved in measuring innovation with patent data, and we can discuss it later. I'm happy to take questions on that. But what I would like to highlight here is that the same pattern is observed, with Shenzhen leading, then of course followed by Suzhou, and third place, Dongguan. So these are the upgrading outcomes. Now we move to a very brief illustration for the semiconductor industry in each city. So the idea here is to assess how each of these three cities have moved along the semiconductor value chain. So very briefly, the idea here is to divide the semiconductor value chain into 3 steps. So we have the design or the fabulous step, the first one, and you have the second, the fabrication or the manufacturing. These 2 steps, design and fabrication, are more high value added. Now the third step, assembly or testing and packaging, it's more labor intensive, and therefore it has lower value added. So that's of course a very brief exposition. So, but the takeaway message here is design and fabrication or manufacturing are high value added, and assembly is low value added. So even within the semiconductors industry, we also have a low value added segment, which is the assembly part. Here talking about the state-business interactions, right? So that's analysis of policy proposals found in the 3 cities, CPPCCs, the People's Political Consultative Conferences. I don't have much time to spend on this slide here, but the idea here is to show that the CPPCCs can be a platform where policy inputs from business side are made and the state bureaucrats interact with business. So there are not only policy suggestions and complaints, but also replies from the state bureaucrats. You can discuss it later when I have more time. And finally, I go to this breakdown of the total sales revenues by the 3 segments of the value chain for each city. And what you can observe here is that Shenzhen concentrates most of its revenues, so around 75%, here in the design step, which is quite high value added. And that's not what you observe in Suzhou nor in Dongguan, especially in Dongguan, where most of the revenues, 80% basically comes from the assembly. So it's very labor intensive. And Suzhou also has a high concentration here in the assembly step, even though not as bad as Dongguan. And Suzhou has a higher participation in manufacturing as well. So if you think about Hejian, which is a company, manufacturing company in Suzhou, that's an important company for the local economy. It is a foreign company, by the way. It's a subsidiary of UMC, which is a Taiwanese company, second only to the TSMC. But the idea here is to show that even though China has been catching up in terms of the semiconductors industry, that has been a quite uneven catching up. So Shenzhen seems to be performing relatively well, concentrating most of the revenues on the design, but even powerful cities such as Suzhou, and to a lesser extent Dongguan, are still based on the low labor intensive segments. So that puts some questions on China's efforts to catch up in semiconductors. And just to conclude, I'd like to highlight 3 topics. First, the enduring importance of state-business coalitions in China up to nowadays. So it seems to be a characteristic of the system, not just a phase. That's quite important. The second point is that in the second phase, however, there are new mechanisms for information sharing between business and state bureaucrats. So that also leads to needs for the call for more research here. And the third point, we're trying to highlight upgrading obstacles. So we're highlighting 3 different issues here. First, the different types of foreign capital is illustrated. Second, the lack of skilled workforce in some cities, therefore the lack of absorptive capacities that can be a problem. And third, the bureaucratic fragmentation we find in some cities that can be a problem for policy implementation and policy cohesion. That's it. Thanks. I hope I did it within the time limit.
Excellent, Alex. Thank you. You did it. Yes, within 10 minutes. Right on time. Thank you. No pressure to the next person. Chiara, I think, yes, Alex, you can finish that now. Yes, thank you. Okay, Chiara, over to you now. Thank you.
Okay, so.
Yep.
Okay, you should be able to see the screen now, correct?
Yes, and then we can hear you as well. That's great.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you.
Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. Very happy to be with you, even if online this year. The paper we are presenting, I am presenting, is a part basically of a research path that is lasting since 15 years so far, and it's related to industrial policies in China, structural change, and the relation between state and market in China. This bit of research has been published in China Economic Review, so if you want to have a look at the paper, you can do it, or I can share it with you. So as I was saying, this is a part of a path of research which is related to Chinese industrial policies, in particular in relation to selective policies. So vertical policies that are aimed to fostering specific sectors, specific territories, specific actors, and what is the role of these policies in promoting structural change in the country as a whole. In this bit of our research, we focus on a specific tool that has been used by Chinese policymakers in order to foster some sectors, which is the identification of strategic emerging sectors in Chinese 5-year plans and their effects on the change in the structures of the markets and of the sectors via mergers and acquisitions. Mergers and acquisitions have been broadly studied in economics and economic field as from the firm level perspective. However, they do have a role in transforming the structure of the sectors and the structures of markets where the firms are, because they change concentration, they change market power, they change bargaining powers among actors in the market. So they have a role in transforming the structures. The case of China in terms of industrial policy is very peculiar. China has made broad use of selective industrial policies, and policymakers have explicitly acknowledged the transformative role of mergers and acquisitions, and so their role in changing the power relations within sectors and between sectors, among sectors, and for some sectors they have, and also for some types of actors, such as, for example, state-owned enterprises in the first half of 2000s, they have explicitly encouraged it. In terms of selective policies, one of the key instruments for Chinese policymaker have been the 5-year plans, which explicitly target and identify 2 types of sectors, which are relevant in the mindset of policymakers, and therefore in designing the policies, the initiatives that characterize the 5-year periods after the 5-year plan is issued, which are pillar industries on one hand and strategic emerging industries. Pillar industries are those sectors which are which have the most relevant role in the economy in the moment when the 5-year plan is issued. So they have a large contribution to GDP, to employment, and so on and so forth. Strategic emerging industries, on the other hand, have a more specific feature because they are those sectors which, according to policymakers, are to be the ones that are leading the economy towards a transformation, because they are usually those sectors which have a large growth potential, and which have a technological endowment which is higher than other sectors. They are usually those sectors that are at the technological frontier in the international sphere. So it's a way for Chinese policymakers to design the catch up of their economy towards frontier technology sectors. So what we do is exploring whether the identification of these sectors in the 5-year plan can work as a signals for economic actors, for firms in particular, to engage in mergers and acquisitions. The idea is as follows. Once strategic emerging sectors are selected, it usually follows a wide range of policy initiatives which are specific to those sectors, or either to those filières or to those specific products, to encourage their production, the enlargement of the sites, of their sites in the economy, technological upgrading, and so on and so forth. So being selected as an emerging sector generates positive expectations by firms in those sectors and about those sectors. And this is the mechanism through which we hypothesize identifying emerging sectors in 5-year plans is able to generate a reorganization of the structures of markets. So as I was saying before, emerging sectors are relatively small sectors in the economy which have large growth prospects, are at the international technology frontier, and have an innovative potential which is systemic, which is able to promote a systemic shift of the economy. And as I was also stating before, the focus on emerging sector is not just a focus which is just inside the 5-year plans. It is a systemic focus of industrial policies for the 5 years that follow. So you have a wide range of policy interventions that are both conventional, let's say conventional, which means related to firms, tax exemptions, subsidies, and so on and so forth, imports ban, and so on and so forth. But there are also other policy measures which are not related, which are not focused on firms, but which are related to the context, to territories, for example, like a pilot project at city level or provincial level, special economic zones that are specialized in those sectors, town level specialization, sector lists, and so on and so forth. In some of the 5-year plans and dedicated plans, the reorganization of the market structure is also explicitly stated. Why is this so? Because a fragmented structure of a sector means lower average size, which means possibly the absence of scale economies, the presence of inefficiencies, the difficulty in investing in R&D and technology, and so on and so forth. So there is an interest, a specific interest of policymakers in relation to strategic emerging sectors in generating a change in the market structure. So what we do is we empirically explore whether this linkage makes sense. So whether there is a causal relation between sectoral selective policies in the 5-year plans and mergers and acquisition waves at the industry level during each 5-year plan period. So we basically study whether after the emerging sector is selected, there is an increase in the number and in the type of mergers and acquisitions in the following 5 years. We also discriminate among various forms of mergers and acquisitions. We will see, I will tell you later on that there are broadly 3 types of mergers and acquisitions, which are vertical, horizontal, and conglomerate. But we also have a look at whether the actors, the final actors, let's say, so the firms matters. So whether this is just a signal that works for state-owned enterprises, for example, where the linkage between policymakers and the firm is more strict, or whether this also works for private firms. From the methodological point of view, I will skip the methodological treatment because, I think that for this context, what matters more is the broad scope and the broad aim of this paper. So at the industry level, mergers and acquisition exert an important role because they can generate the reallocation of assets. They can allow sectors to adapt to shocks and changes by reconfiguring the allocation of resources. But at the firm level, there is also strategic aspects of mergers and acquisitions, because they change the relations among firms, as I was stating before. And this strategic rationale changes according to the type of mergers and acquisitions. For example, horizontal mergers and acquisitions, when two firms that belong to the same stage of production merge, or one acquires the other, are related to the increase in the market power, basically. Vertical mergers and acquisitions, so when one firm acquires another firm from a different stage of the same sector, is aimed at changing the supplier-customer relation. And conglomerate M&A are among or between firms that belong to different sectors. This is usually made by firms to employ their overcapacity. But from the industrial level point of view, mergers and acquisition are a tool to change competitive dynamics because, of course, as I was stating before, they generate a restructuring of the sector by gaining efficiency, but also generating a change in market power with potential welfare losses. Okay, from the empirical point of view, we build an original database. We collect all 1995 mergers and acquisition in 33 two-digit industrial sectors from 1999 to 2013. And then we make a structural content analysis on 4 5-year plans to identify what are the sectors that are identified as strategic emerging. And then we also collect some other industrial performance and indicators data to use as a control. Okay, this is summary statistics for the dependent variables. We have total mergers and acquisition, but also mergers and acquisitions by type and by actor. These are the type of sectors that are identified. I think I don't have much time to go into this, so I will skip this so I can go very rapidly to the results and the conclusions. So basically what we find is that mergers and acquisition being identified as an emerging sector is effective in generating an increase in mergers and acquisitions in total, but also by type. So they stimulate vertical integration, they stimulate the increase in average size, but they also stimulate an opportunistic behavior by firm to enter in a new sector which they don't know and which plausibly they don't have the assets and knowledge to perform perform effectively. Also, we find that there are effects both for private firms and for state-owned enterprises. Both act strategically to increase the control over production, so both merge vertically. Private firms tend to merge more horizontally, and we don't actually know whether one of the two is whether private or public firms is generating significant increase in conglomerate M&A. So going to the final remarks, what we have find is that Chinese 5-year plans can effectively be able to affect the economic actors' behavior by reorienting firm strategies within and across industries. That industrial policy measures and the expectation related to industrial policies can generate changes in the markets and in sectors, and this is just consistent with an industrial policy view which is strategic, aimed at promoting structural changes. Finally, this opens a reflection about how can planning policies intervene in market structure and determine the organizational forms of capitalistic markets. And this also opens a reflection about the relation between states and markets. Because mergers and acquisition are usually considered a tool in the hand of capitalists in their struggle against each other in the intercapitalistic struggle, but we also find that Chinese government have used this tool, mergers and acquisition, for some other ends, some other objectives, which is promoting structural change. And this is an open question. So is this a non-capitalistic use of capitalistic means, which is of course open to discussion in relation to the nature of the Chinese state? Thank you very much. This is the end.
Thank you, Chiara. That was an excellent presentation and a very thoughtful question laying open at the end. I think that will attract quite a lot of comments and also questions, hopefully. So we got Francesco next.
Yep.
Is it your presentation PowerPoint there, Francesco?
I'm trying to share my screen. All right, let's see. We can. It's not there. Window. Nope. No, it don't. Let's see where. Ah, it's there. All right.
Yep.
Share. Okay. Can you see it?
We can. Yes. Yes, that's great.
All right.
Presentation mode. Okay. Yes.
All right. So thank you so much. So today, I'm going to summarize the results of a research titled China's Escape from the Peripheral Condition, a Success Story. And my goal is to understand whether China is effectively escaping from its peripheral status within the world economy. That is, if real wages in China will continue to converge with those of high-income countries. And in order to try to answer this question, I start from the observation that a major obstacle that prevents peripheral countries from closing the wage gap with respect to the advanced economies usually results from the distortion of their productive structure towards low value added sectors, sectors which are highly exposed to low cost competition. And for this reason, firms in the periphery usually require an always excessive supply of labor that, by maintaining a downward pressure on wages, allows them to survive in international competition. So what we need to keep in mind is that an excessive reduction of this labor surplus would inevitably lead to a rise in urban wages, which would compromise the ability of the exporters to compete internationally. And in these conditions, the maintenance of external balance requires a contraction in investment in order to recreate an excess of labor, which brings back wages back to the level necessary to recover external competitiveness. So if we assume that the inability of less developed nations to support the growth of their incomes stems from an unequal international specialization, then it follows that the best and probably the unique strategy that might guarantee the compatibility of full employment and high wages on the one hand and external balance on the other requires a progressive change in their productive specialization towards high technology markets. So basically, the key idea is that the higher the technological specialization, the higher the price that the global markets assign to the goods exported by these firms in the periphery. So the high price of high-tech products might allow firms that specialize in these sectors to increase the labor compensation without these squeezing profit margins and leading to a process of deindustrialization and external imbalances, like in South America in the 60s. And against this background, I argue that the economic policies pursued by the Chinese government have played a key role in improving the technological capabilities, thanks to which Chinese firms are progressively gaining access to oligopolistic technology markets. And this will eventually allow China to gradually narrow the wage gap against the highly developed countries without this leading to an unsustainable external imbalance in the long run. So in our study, we differentiate between two stages in the dynamics of inter-industrial specialization towards higher value-added production. An initial stage from about mid-1990s to 2008, and the second stage from the late 2000s until today. Now, in the first stage, the key element setting in motion a process of the acquisition of new technological capabilities was the maintenance of a competitive real exchange rate, and this is coherent with what was argued by Danny Roderick, Dollar, Popov, and other scholars. And in fact, what we need to keep in mind is that an exchange rate policy which is oriented towards shifting the economic output towards the tradable sector must be able to convert domestic savings into domestic investment slowly enough so as to not tighten the labor market too rapidly. But at the same time, this policy must be able to convert domestic savings into domestic investment quickly enough so as to not leave a substantial surplus of labor trapped in low value added agricultural sectors. So we try to build a simple model here. If you like, we can go back later to this during the discussion and questions. So what we found was that the real exchange policies adopted by the Chinese government has been able to convert, to modulate domestic savings into domestic investment slowly enough so as to not absorb the surplus labor from the countryside too rapidly in order to avoid inflationary pressure. This has put downward pressure on real wages in China. Real wages here, as you can see, the yellow line, real wages which remain well below the productivity in the blue line. And this in turn has supported the profitability of the manufacturing sector, which encouraged its development. And it also encouraged, as you might know, the accumulation of a trade surplus. And in turn, the external position, the strong external position has contributed to attract high quality foreign direct investment in China since the late 90s, which has secured a high degree of technology transfer and therefore the promotion of industrial upgrading. Okay. So this as for the first stage. Now, this development strategy has produced remarkable results. However, the arrival of the Lewis turning point around 2003, 2004 in China led to an impressive rise in real wages, which in fact began to grow faster than productivity. And as a result, we witnessed a significant reduction in the profitability of manufacturing sector since the late 2000s, the green line. So the fall in profitability might be an indication that the Chinese economy has entered a stage of so-called comparative advantage vacuum. What is that? Because on the one hand, the country has lost its comparative advantage in labor-intensive sectors. On the other, China as yet to gain a comparative advantage in technology-based sector. So if the goal is to overcome this trap, this middle income trap, the economy of China requires a quick shift in the pattern of specialization towards more profitable high-tech sectors. And this requires learning new skills and more advanced capabilities. Now, the issue is that the market mechanisms alone in middle-income economies are often incapable to spontaneously attract resources towards the most advanced technological sectors. And the reason for this is that high-tech sectors in middle-income economies are characterized by a low profitability due to the rapid acceleration of urban wages, but they are also characterized by a low productivity in these more advanced sectors. And these two factors makes them unable, these countries, to attract investment which are necessary to sustain high levels of production, of output, which are needed to increase the level of technological capabilities of the labor force due to learning by doing. Now, in the post-2008 period, the role of the leadership, the Chinese authorities, appears to have been decisive in preserving productive resources in the manufacturing sector in a context of declining profitability. And here, the key role was played by the state-owned enterprises basically for two reasons. First, their ability to undertake investments guided by social goals established by the government. And second, because of their ability to operate even in the presence of low or even negative profit. And as you can see, the rate of profit in the public industrial sector owned by the state has been much lower than that of the private industrial sector. And despite the low rate of returns, the weight of the state-owned enterprises on the overall industrial sector has been increasing over the past few years, especially after 2013. And indeed, as Nicholas Lardy would say, the state is striking back in recent years. And here you can see the ratio of state-owned capital stock on total capital stock in the industrial sector, the blue line. And you can see that this ratio, this share, remained quite stable after 2013. And it also showed a gradual upward trend since 2016. Unfortunately, we have this is the last available year. And so the authorities of China have used state-owned enterprises to support high levels of industrial output and employment, which not only allowed the process of learning and acquisition of productive skills initiated in the previous decade to continue, but also raised technological capabilities of the national workforce. So we try to assess the evolution of China's industrial structure towards the high-tech sector, and for this purpose we introduce an indicator which we call the labor's terms of trade. And this indicator is defined as the ratio of the prices actually assigned by international markets to the Chinese factors of production involved in the production of China's goods exported to the US. So basically the actual wage bill and profit divided by the hypothetical price assigned to those factors of production if the same amount of goods were produced in the US. So basically, we divided the actual manufacturing value added that is generated entirely in China by the hypothetical value added under the scenario that Chinese labor and capital were remunerated as the factors of production employed in the manufacturing sector in the United States. And in these figures, we can see that we see the evolution of the China's labor terms of trade between 1995 and 2017. And it basically tells us that in 1995, 1 hour of US labor, manufacturing labor, was exchanged against only, 20 hours of Chinese manufacturing labor. But in 2000, almost 22 years later, in 2017, 1 hour of US manufacturing labor was exchanged against only 5 hours of Chinese labor. So what we basically found is that the technological gap between China's and United States is narrowing. In fact, Chinese firms, the fact that these labor terms of trade, Chinese labor terms of trade are improving means that the technological gap between the two countries, China and the United States, is narrowing. And in fact, Chinese firms have learned how to produce increasingly complex goods that a diminishing number of countries can produce, and therefore they can set the selling prices for their output that are relatively high compared to the labor and the capital value their output contains. And finally, we show that this government-led strategy is successfully encouraging the expansion of technology-intensive sectors, which in fact has counterbalanced the gradual loss of competitive advantage of China's low value-added sectors. And this is quite clear if we observe the dynamics of the balance of trade over the past decade, during which the massive growth of wages did not result in a sustainable external imbalances. In spite of the explosion of wages and the improvement of labor terms of trade, the Chinese trade balance has remained significantly positive over the past 25 years, and at around 5% of GDP even after 2010 onwards. And today is probably higher. So to conclude, and this is the last slide, if we define the escape from the peripheral condition as the capacity to support wage growth with the maintenance of external balance, our study suggests that China will eventually successfully overcome its peripheral position in the global economy in the coming years and gradually catch up with Western countries in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesco. That was really great. And yeah, the figures there are very impressive. I think it is quite eye-opening to a lot of people, to myself definitely. The next one is the last paper of today, of the session today. It is from Victor. Victor, are you there? Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Hi,
I'll share
Victor.
my screen.
Yes, thank you. Brilliant. Okay, over to you now, Victor.
Okay. And do you see?
Yes, no problem, that's fine.
Okay, right. So, hi everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to present my research with you. And going into the presentation, we start from a historical process view regarding the evolution capabilities of the Chinese state to intervene in its territory. To this end, we seek to understand how regional and urban planning has been evolving amidst the historical process of Chinese process of development. So we do this based on the concept of socio-economic formation elaborated by Marx and later refined by Lenin, among others. In short, this concept is understood as a combination and manifestation of elements and historical forms of distinct modes of production that conform a given society throughout history, culminating in a present time. As a dialectical and historical materialist conception, it makes it methodologically possible to apprehend the unity and totality in the historical process, understanding reality as a synthesis of multiple determinations. So it's based on this concept that we will approach the particular Chinese case, understanding it as a new type of economic social formation since 1978. So we consider the three main elements. First, the dominant political and state regime of socialist character. And second, the reinvention of market institutions that shape the order and economic dynamics. And three, what we can call the natural economy, remnants still present in the rural areas of the country. We regard to Chinese urban regional development, viewed in historical process, we can divide it into three main phases. First, a period of balanced regional development without distortions between the development of the various regions of the country. And second, the period from the beginning of the reforms until the 2000 years, characterized by the uneven development that can be classified as unbalanced. And finally, and as the focus of this research, the period from the mid-2000 years to the present day, which can be understood as a period of maturation of the coordinated regional development strategy. So it emerged in the midst of a general trend in CPC, the Communist Party of China governance, of revigorating the planning function and of encouraging the coordination and supervision of the party and the central government over administration and public policies. In this sense, it reflects a movement that evidences a responsive attitude on the part of the state to the contradictions that had emerged by them. As an unfolding of 5 comprehensive coordinations aiming at confronting the main contradictions, in this case, regional and urban-rural inequalities, the coordinated regional development becomes more explicit from the 18th Congress of the CPC in 2012. Based on large infrastructure and transportation projects and works as one of the drivers for the expansion of development throughout the national territory, it is intended to confer greater rationality and coherence to regional and local development through the stimulation of cooperation rather than competition between nearby cities. In the sense, more than promoting balanced development as opposed to regional imbalance, the central idea is to integrate differentiated space. So in the 2000 years, a series of studies and urban regional plans were elaborated. Basically, these plans represent a deepening of the rationalization of territorial occupation in the country, indicating trends for the process of urban regional development, with emphasis on the promotion of the so-called city clusters and the necessary transport infrastructure to ensure interregional connectivity, like this, the National Urban System Plan, and this, the National Main Functional Area Plan. So coordinated regional development, the main exponent of the large infrastructure and transportation projects for the promotion of the coordinated regional development is the high-speed rail network. Since the 2008, it has been expanding at an impressive speed throughout the Chinese territory, currently totaling about 37,000 kilometers in length, with forecasts for extensive expansion in the coming years. In 2018, and the forecast for the next years. And coordinated regional development takes on greater contours with the launch of the new urbanization concept, institutionalized through the National New Urbanization Plan in 2014. It seeks to reflect the changing priorities in Chinese development, considers the exhaustions of the previous dynamic of extensive urbanization with rapid industrialization and economic growth as the drivers of development, many located on the coast. The proposed priority becomes the transition from a type of urbanization based on quantity to one focused on quality. So 6 main focuses are highlighted for its realization. The major ones are the planning of the countryside city transition, which involves a major challenge of creating about 30 million urban jobs per year, in addition to investments in infrastructure and policies that ensure greater access to public service for the new residents. And second, the integration of urbanization, industry, information technology, and agriculture being one of the engines of the modernization development process. And third, the improving of spatial layouts, which requires the coordinated development of cities and small towns based on major city clusters as a major form of urbanization, as well as intensified transport integration. And as a particular case of application of the concepts of coordinated regional development, the Xinjiang region, consisting of Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei province, should be highlighted. In short, it is a region of disparities where the developed and the underdeveloped coexist. This is clear in the difference in the level of development between Beijing and Tianjin relative to Hebei, the latter with a still significant rural population and with productive activities yet to be integrated and modernized. So basically, its strategic functions is to become a world-class city cluster, a leading area of coordinated regional development and reform, and a new engine for innovation-driven economic growth. To design regional integration is envisaged, where Hebei province should become a pilot zone for industrial upgrading and a demonstration zone for new urbanization and urban-rural coordination. As a continuation of this process of effecting the Xinjiang coordinated development and place itself as the most advanced point of experimentation expression of new type urbanization in the country, the CPC Central Committee and the State Council decided in 2017 to create Shenzhen New Area located in Hebei province. Like here. In a few words, one of its purposes is to become a convergence and destination point for activities to be transferred from Beijing, as expressed in the report of the 19th Congress of the CPC, aiming to attract scientific and research institutions. The proposal is to make Shenzhen an incubation center for the country's technological development, an innovation, intelligent, green, and livable city. So now entering the hypothesis we are working with, we consider that it's possible to speak that the process of uneven development planning seen from an urban regional perspective is maturing the Chinese socio-economic formation. We state this on the basis that capitalism, although it has several contradictions regarding the subordination of the human-natural relations and of society itself to the logic of the market and accumulation, also carries in its content a potentially revolutionary objective contradiction from the increase of productivity and the specialization of the social division of labor. An increase in the socialization of production occurs in parallel with a private appropriation of wealth. When this transformation engendered by the capitalist mode of production is inserted in a spatial perspective, it can be seen that development is not carried out in a homogeneous way or at the same pace. Therefore, development is a uneven development. Development itself has its immanent contradictions, as it combines the backwardness of certain elements of a social formation with the dynamism of others. However, at the same time, the existence of inequality does not close off the possibility of spreading, expanding development from a more advanced region to a more backward one. In this sense, and here we introduce the theme of development planning as the exercise of political power of a socialist character. We consider that the planning of the productive force and the social relations of production are placed as a possibility to overcome the contradictions inherent in the capitalist mode of production, in the sense of converting the capacity for the production of wealth to the interest of society itself through the qualitative elevation of the relationship between human and the product of his labor. Thus, to plan uneven development would mean to act in the direction of enhancing the dynamic characteristics of development to the detriment of its most backward elements. In this sense, more than planning development, in our opinion, the challenge posed by the CPC seems to be to plan the two movements of regional development engendered by the accumulation of capital, in the already consolidated and developed areas, promoting differentiation, and in extension, in the expansion and underdeveloped areas, in the sense of promoting in a planned way the homogenization of national development, that is, reducing regional disparities. And articulating the empirical content with the theoretical one that we are proposing, we consider that the planning of uneven development in the Chinese case today takes place through the coordination of regional development as a planning form. Thus, we understand the duality between, on the one hand, the state planning of a socializing character, and on the other hand, the need to expand the markets as a generator of exchange value, a unit of opposites that functions as the engine of development. So the essential thing is to be able to grasp the tendency of this process. And in our opinion, the recent events have been indicating the tendency that the accumulation process will be increasingly guided by large projects carried out in the state sphere, making the production of public goods the main source of dynamism of Chinese development. For this reason, we use the concept of new projectment economy, new in relation to the original elaboration by the Brazilian economist Inácio Rangel of projectment economy. Basically, we want to call attention to the fact that the project, seen in concrete totality with planning, acquires a status of scientific practice that seeks to replace market force, transferring the economic metric of the exchange value of goods by the metric of social utility as a new base for economic calculation. In this case, we could speak to the construction of the high-speed rail network and the new type urbanization represented here by the Shenzhen area as expressions of great projects. In other words, as project forms, which must be seen in their totality with indeed coordinated development as a planning form at the higher stage of Chinese state intervention in the territory. In conclusion, the planning of the expansion of urban regional development through the political exercise of rationalizing the process of capital production and circulation, the integration of countryside city, and the emergence of a new pattern of urbanization tends to become a territorial expression of the new projectment economy. And based on the concept of socioeconomic formation, this would mean the concrete possibility of the maturation of socialism in the midst of the Chinese modernization process. In closing, using a phrase from Brazilian geographer Milton Santos, we consider that it's the forms that attribute to the probable new content, still abstract, the possibility of becoming new and real content. For this reason, we believe modestly that it's necessary that social scientists committed to apprehend the new and more advanced in the political economy and planning science in the contemporary world be attentive and accompany this process. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Victor. Take us to look at all the new projects in China that is currently undergoing. So that's a great overview of this. And thank you for linking them up and giving a theory of that. Okay, so now we are into the Q&A session. So anyone who would like to ask questions, please use the raise hand function. If you go to the reactions, and then you can raise your hand. Someone joined. Okay, I muted that person. Okay. Yes, please indicate.
No.
Yes, Chiara, please go ahead.
I have a question for Alexandre. So, hello. It's always interesting to see the stage of the work you are at. I've seen your presentations also years before at the IPPE conference. My question is, have you thought about looking also at the links among these three cities in terms specifically in terms of capital migration, for example, because of course, I mean, Dongguan city has a history of capital import from Shenzhen, for example. So this might also mean something in terms of what is the stage of the business state relation, local state relation in those areas.
Thank you, Chiara. I think I would also have a question for Alex as well. Yes, Alex, you have shown that there are some kind of unequal or uneven development in the region, especially in the semiconductor industry. Just wanted to ask you, because it seems like a kind of a division of labor, because for an industry of that scale, you almost would go into specialization. Some regions will be good at assembling, or some will be good at designing. So, but the Xi Jinping is also highlighting that they want more egalitarian developments now. So, regardless of the kind of specialization that happens naturally, do you see anything that the government is doing trying to make it a more equal development in the region, especially for taking this industry as an example? Yeah. Okay, I got another question. I think I will take one more question and then we can go to the answering. Someone seems to be always be on some background noise there. Zeng, is it Zeng?
It is Zeng.
Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you. Yes, okay. Please
okay.
Go ahead.
Hello. Thank you very much for the presentations. I have two questions. First one is for Alexandre Gomes. Now, you have three cities, Shenzhen, Suzhou, Dongguan, and you take them as three different areas and you compared them. But when I look at the map, I see Shenzhen and Dongguan are neighbors. So probably we have a center-periphery relationship between these two. Instead of taking these three as separate entities, so Shenzhen and Dongguan might have some linkages between these two among themselves. So have you discussed that in that paper? I'm not sure. The second one is for Francesco. You ended up your paper on a very positive note, which is very good. But so you're saying China will catch up. But I remember, like Samir Amin, looking at Chinese development and arguing that China will develop into two nations, like China with its huge population, 1,400,000,000 people, will be divided into like a developed section and a very large underdeveloped section. How can you be so sure that all these people will end up in a prosperous, very large country? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Alex, I think I will let you answer the questions first, and then we'll be to Francesco. Okay, Alex.
Okay, cool. Thank you for the questions. They help us to clarify some of our ideas and some of our thoughts. So I think the question by Chiara and Zeng, they're more or less similar. So we start these questions and then I move to San's question. So about the link of the three cities and the comparison by these three cities and potential problems. So we decided these three cities based on the idea of some people call the most similar system design. So try to compare three cities which have more or less the same characteristics in the beginning, but at the end they differ. And why do you believe these three cities are more or less similar? Because they started 1978 with basically they're quite unimportant in the early 80s. So the cities are the growth phenomenon from the 80s and 90s onwards. So they're not important. They're not important if in the 70s, like Shanghai was, like Nanjing was, Beijing was. So this is the first point. The third point is because they became quite important in terms of the production of ICT goods and electronics. But then, of course, as the years evolved, they specialize in different segments. So Shenzhen is performing better and Dongguan worse. Now, there are many problems, as I think both comment, in terms of the linkage between, especially Dongguan and Shenzhen, because of course they're neighbors. And we identified two linkages, so to speak, one in terms of capital, one in terms of labor. So in terms of capital, there are indeed companies from Shenzhen that now are based in Dongguan. And for Huawei, for instance, they opened that subsidiary there. And in our policy analysis, the document analysis from the CPPCC, so the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, one of the complaints from people from Shenzhen is besides that, what they call the hauling out of the manufacturing Shenzhen. They're complaining that they're losing manufacturing, especially for other cities such as Zhuhai and Dongguan. And apparently Huawei is the biggest taxpayer in Dongguan, so they're complaining about it. They're calling for policies, local policies from Shenzhen to re-attract these manufacturing companies. Another linkage is about labor. So real estate prices in Shenzhen have been increasing a lot, quite fast. Of course, in Dongguan, this is cheaper. So there are people moving from Shenzhen to Dongguan and commuting every day. But what is interesting that people in Dongguan, of course, they are aware of that. They're trying to use this price differential to attract skilled labor. So they're trying to redevelop some areas near to Shenzhen in order to create more amenable areas for high skilled workers. So in order to bring more skilled workforce to Dongguan, because that's precisely one of the shortcomings of the Dongguan model, so to speak. So that's clear in the data of universities and R&D workers. And then, of course, a lot of, again, path dependencies and cumulative causations, right? Once one city becomes poorer in relation to the neighbor, it's harder to attract skilled workers, but they're trying to enact policies to revert this tendency. But again, that's something found in the policy documents we analyzed from the CPPCC. So there are actual policies trying to exploit these differences. Now the question about my son, about the division of labor, it's again connected. So there might be a kind of division of labor, that's true. But then that comes to the problem of local protectionism, and that, yes, when you see the data, it seems that there is a kind of division of labor, but all the cities, they want to have all the three segments. So if you take documents from Dongguan, they complain they have no manufacturing, they need manufacturing. And then if you see the documents in Suzhou, they complain they should have more design as well. So they all want to, especially because there's a national level investment fund, right? So the money is pouring. So they all want to improve the whole chain in the whole city. They want to have design, manufacturing, and assembly testing. They will have it all. So in theory, there is kind of market forces driving a division of labor in China, regionally speaking. But that's not what we find in terms of what the local leaders want. And I think that's the old problem of local protectionism in China. That's a problem that emerged in the 80s, and it's not as bad as before, of course, but we still see that because local officials are still quite powerful in controlling funds, and at least they can control, of course, the supply of land and other benefits for local business. So they want to bring as much things as they can just to create more tax revenues. So there is this measure. So yes, there is a market incentive to create a division of labor, but there is the tendency of local officials to build the whole entire chain at the same time. I think that's it.
Yes, thank you. Francesco.
All right, I will try to answer this $1 million question. How can we be sure that China will eventually succeed in crossing the middle income trap, right? Or that China will not split into macro areas. Actually, to be completely honest with you, I'm not familiar with the hypothesis put forward by with these hypotheses put forward by Samir Amin. I mean, I never heard this idea from his writings. So if you want to share with me some references on this point, I would be grateful. But how can we be sure that China will succeed? Well, according to me, our main idea actually was originally set by Samir Amin itself in 1976, I think, in his uneven development. And actually, this his idea is very similar to the one put forward by Tirwol. And the key idea is that the maintenance of external balance constitutes the most binding constraint on the backward countries' attempt to overcome their peripheral condition. So this is our starting point. So how is possible to support wage growth without undermining external balance? So for us, the only way to find a compromise between wage growth and then the maintenance of external balance is that the rise of wages must be coherent with the growth of technological skills. So this is our main idea. And in our study, in our research, we try to show that the central authority played a key role in supporting the upgrading of domestic competences in the first stage through the strategic use of real exchange rate policies, and in the second stage through the strategic use of state-owned enterprises. So in our view, there is a parallel growth in both real wages and domestic competences. Now, honestly speaking, I don't know whether China is going to split in a most advanced country or area and a backward area. Of course, I totally agree with you, and I also believe that the Chinese government agree very much with this idea that there is a huge inequality between the eastern provinces and the western internal provinces. And I also think that they are trying to relocate many industries or less advanced industries from the eastern to the western areas of China in order to build up a strong manufacturing capabilities, which eventually would translate itself into the upgrading of the industrial structure in the future. But I don't know whether the Chinese government will succeed in this strategy.
Okay, thank you, Francesco. We got two hands up. First one is Walter Dom, and then we got Baisa Tasfei. I hope I pronounced it right. So first over to Walter Dom. Yes.
Hi. I have two questions for Francesco. The first, I haven't had a chance to absorb your calculations as presented here, but I noticed that they are similar. Your investigation of China's trade relations with the United States are similar or parallel to those of Minchi Li in the recent issue of the Monthly Review magazine. And you come to the conclusion that China will be able to catch up in terms of trade. As I recall, he comes to an opposite conclusion. So could you comment on that and compare your analyses with his? That's a long question to answer, but just a suggestion. And the second point is, the United States is currently engaged in this new Cold War against China, and in particular is trying to prevent China from gaining access to the most advanced technology having to do with computers. What effect do you think that will have on China's ability to advance to, a more advanced stage?
Okay.
All
right.
So just hold on 1 second. We got another question. Baisa, please unmute yourself.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Can you? Okay. Thank you very much. I want to thank the speakers for their insightful presentation. And, my question is for Alexandre Gomes, and that is on state business relation in China. And recently, I'm working on in a similar topic, I could say, in a different context. And also, he used the Peter Evans's conceptual framework of embedded autonomy. That, like, from my reading, the embedded autonomy concept Peter used to understand the industrialization experiences of Japan and other East Asian developmental states, maybe whom he considered as states which have a coherent and effective and capable bureaucracy to effectively embed into the society and produce economic outcome. That's his proposition. But do you think China delivers such bureaucratic coherence? Referring to the cases of regions you have mentioned, this is the first question. The other one is, I also saw you mentioned not specifically clarified in detail this slide, which I liked, about public-private consultative forum. So in that forum, maybe the question I want to raise is, which businesses are, of course, included in this forum? Like from the very beginning, what state business relation entails in terms of the business part, especially. Who are these businesses? In terms of size, the large or small scale enterprises, foreign or domestic. So maybe I want to share your view on this. And the other one is, what about the institutional foundation of these public-private consultative forums? Are they legally binding so that the consultation is formal, institutionalized, and regular? What about the degree of compliance of the actors, public and private actors, for the common decisions made? So these are sort of questions I want to get your view on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before we go to Francesco and Alex, I have a question for Chiara. Chiara, as you have shown that the M&A is part of a strategy that the government has used to help its industrial upgrade plan. But as we know, there are increasing scrutiny from especially the US and the Western countries regarding Chinese firms acquiring and merging deals. So there may be possibly this route to industrial upgrade may not be possible in the future very soon. So do you think there is any preparation for this in the future if M&A is not going to be successful in most cases? Then what do you think they are going to do? Yes, the question for Victor. Victor, you have shown that you have highlighted the unity of opposites in the Chinese way of achieving in the historical formation of socialism. And one of the main things is that it's using market to develop the socialist project. But as we know that the capital would resist planning because the principles they operate on is to maximize profit. So don't know if you have any comment on this part. What is the resistance and how big is that, and how they can be overcome by the Chinese government in order to continue this path that they are pursuing? Okay, thank you. So I will give it over to Francesco and then Alex and then Chiara and Victor. Francesco.
All right. I think that my microphone is open. So as for a comparison with the analysis or the estimate of Minky Lee, actually I'm not familiar with his paper. So if I understood correctly, his research was published by the Monthly Review, and I will take a look at it. As for our analysis, we used basically, or at least we used a methodology which is very similar to the one suggested by Samir Amin in his book published in 1976, and the only difference is that we were able to isolate the value added generated within the Chinese economy. We used the TIVA OECD database, the trading value added database, so that we were able to calculate the wages and the profits contain the value added contained within the output entirely generated within China. So this is the only difference with respect to Samir Amin's methodology. So I will take a look at the Minky Lee's analysis. But according to our analysis, since the labor terms of trade against the US are improving in parallel with the maintenance of external balance, we argue that China will eventually succeed in catching up in the future with high-income countries. The second question, right, the trade war. What is gonna be the impact of trade war on Chinese economy? Well, this is another huge question. So so I'm speaking out loud now. I personally believe that probably this trade war launched against China will probably slow down the process of catch-up. China will not be able to attract advanced technologies from the US economy, and we know that the process of technological upgrading China has always been based on foreign technologies, right? For example, by attracting high-quality foreign direct investments, etc., etc. Nevertheless, I think that this trade war might have another effect. It might stimulate endogenous innovation.
Thank you, Francesco. I think I will need to give it to Alex now because we only have 10 minutes left and we've got 3 persons to respond. So sorry, really sorry about that. Alex, can you just briefly answer the question?
Okay, I try to be fast. Thank you, Sanki. And thank you, Baisa, for your questions. They're quite interesting and makes us think about some of the topics here. I think you have 3 different questions, right? So the first one about Peter Evans' idea of embedded autonomy. So yeah, we started with this concept, but we don't plan to apply it for China. It's just a starting point. And you are right when you comment that he works with the idea of bureaucratic coherence or a bureaucratic ethos for the Japanese bureaucracy, right? I think we're totally right. But then the question is, can you find the same thing in China? And the short answer, given our time restriction, is no. I don't think you can find. I can unfold that answer in 2 topics. 1, conflictive goals at the central level, and 2, the implementation gap literature. So the implementation gap related to the central-local relations literature in China, right? So often the central government has a central designs a policy, but it is implemented by local agency in a different manner. And then there's a vast literature about that. Just think about, for instance, now electric vehicles in China. They're spending a lot of money in the electric vehicles industry. And they want to promote, of course, the most technologically advanced ones. But you see, what is the most sold Chinese brand now, or Chinese model, is a lower level, low quality electric vehicle for other reasons. So it's the opposite of what the Chinese government wants. That's one problem of the implementation gap of literature. The second one, conflictive goals. So normally you have different goals set by different ministries or different agencies of the central government. Just to give one very current example, China is the country that's spending a lot or the most in green technologies, right? They spend a lot in renewable energies, for instance. But at the same time, China is the country that spends the most in subsidies for fossil fuels. So they're doing the both. So these are conflictive goals coming from the central government. But that's a problem that undermines the bureaucratic coherence of the Chinese state. And then the second point about the business joining the PPCC, who they are. Normally they are quite big and successful business. And in my case, for my table, I only got from the semiconductor industry because that's my case study. And not only domestic, as far as I know, foreign business are not allowed to participate. And regarding your last question was about the institutions behind and how binding they are, right? So they meet every year, once a year, right? But what I'm concerned here is the proposals, the policy proposals that businessmen can send to local officials. And they can send that along the year. There's no limit. You can send every week if you wish. And what is important here is that it's binding that local officials, they reply to those suggestions. So they are forced to reply. So for every single policy suggestion we got, you have replies from the local government as well. So I think that's an important point to highlight. So they can send policy proposals every time of the year, and local officials, they must reply, I think within 6 months, maybe 3, I don't remember, but they are forced to reply. And that creates this necessity of interaction between business and local officials. That's it. I think I answered everything.
Thank you, Chiara.
Thank you, Alexander. I think we'll have also side chat later. Thank you very much.
Chiara?
Yeah, I will be very short. First, stating that governments through 5-year plans can promote mergers and acquisitions in these sectors doesn't mean that then mergers and acquisitions are successful per se. So this is the first thing that we don't know. We just know that this identification can change the structure of the market. I don't think that this specific process can be endangered or is endangered by foreign pressures. What is endangered for sure is the extent to which these sectors can grow because they are put under pressure by the same sectors in other countries because they are frontier technology sectors. But indeed, Chinese government, has historically put in place many other measures and is nowadays putting in place measures to contrast foreign pressures in this sense. For example, by going abroad and acquiring firms with higher technological level. We have a very recent case, for example, in my region, in Emilia-Romagna, in Italy, where First Automotive Works has funded a joint venture on electric vehicles, high proficiency electric vehicles in our region, which is one of the top regions in Europe for the automotive sector. Another strategy is grabbing resources before others do, and this is, for example, for batteries and green vehicles, so in the same sector. So another strategy is fostering endogenous innovation programs with specialization programs on these sectors at the local level. So there are a lot of tools that are related to strategic emerging sectors. Of course, whether these are successful remains, I mean, it's still to be seen. And it also relates to how consistent and how strong and long-term can the pressure from the US be towards these sectors. And also other capitalistic countries.
Thank you, Chiara. Okay, Victor, your response to the last question.
Okay, right. So about the opposing unity that I said that it's represent a contradiction that I think will have to be resolved in the middle of the development process. So I believe that what is essential is the exercise of political power as the dominant regime of the social formation. And we can see this through the state commands of the market, through the companies, state companies and public banks. So regarding the market, to be brief, I believe that the state planning has been positive for it in this moment, since it is this interaction that guarantees development itself. However, as the market becomes an obstacle, the political regime will have to deal with this situation and put the interests of the people before the private capital and the market. And hence, the importance of the socialism regime is the dominant regime in the social formation, which does not guarantee that this process will not occur without problems. But what we can say about today is that the state commands the market through the state companies and public banks. So I think the process will show us what will happen in this sense. Is it?
Thank you, Victor. Thank you, everyone. So we are finishing this session now. The next panel is starting in 15 minutes, and the title is China Under Western Gaze, Perception and Reality. So thank you again to all the presenters today and everyone's participation. It has been a very informative and educational session. Thank you. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.